Vladimir Putin must have believed he had seen the absolute worst Ukraine could throw at him. He must have thought his sheer grinding mass of men and steel would eventually overwhelm the defenders. But on the scorched battlefields of eastern Ukraine, something is changing. A ghost from America's past has just risen from its grave, and it's about to make Russia's war a living hell. The sound it makes isn't a high-tech whistle, it's a deep, terrifying roar. A sound that hasn't been heard in an American arsenal for decades, but is now the sound of doom for Russia's soldiers. Without any press conferences, without any grand announcements, Ukraine has quietly, almost casually, unleashed one of the most fearsome artillery guns ever built. A weapon so powerful, so brutally effective, that it threatens to make Russia's entire frontline strategy completely and utterly useless. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ukraine itself never saw this coming. Russia had absolutely no idea it was even a possibility, but thanks to a steel behemoth forged in the heart of the Cold War, a titan created by the United States decades ago, Ukraine now possesses a devastating tool that could fundamentally alter the course of this brutal war. The weapon in question is the M110 self-propelled howitzer, but don't let the designation fool you. This isn't just another number in an inventory. This is a 203mm cannon of pure, unadulterated destruction. It's the king of conventional artillery, and it has just been handed to the elite 52nd Artillery Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The news broke not with a bang, but with a whisper. United 24 Media confirmed the arrival, citing the brigade itself, which noted the weapon was slotting in perfectly alongside its other advanced systems. In a social media post on April 2nd, the 52nd casually announced its arsenal. Our equipment includes the 2S-22 Bogdana self-propelled howitzer, RM-70 Vampire multiple launch rocket systems, and the 203mm M110A2. They almost made it sound like an afterthought. It is anything but. You are about to discover why the arrival of this forgotten king of the battlefield is about to force a seismic shift in the war. You'll understand why a weapon the US military retired in the 1990s is the perfect nightmare for Putin's 21st century army. First, the question that burns in everyone's mind: how on earth did Ukraine get its hands on M110 howitzers? This is a relic, a museum piece in the eyes of some, officially put out to pasture by the Pentagon. By all logic, it should be impossible for these to appear on a modern battlefield. But here's the critical lesson Russia is about to learn the hard way. Retired does not mean obsolete. The origins of the M110s now carving up Russian positions can be traced back to a masterstroke of battlefield economics and diplomacy. It was reported by Army Recognition that Greece, a NATO ally, had approved a monumental transfer. We're talking about 60% of its US-made M110 artillery systems, a massive cache of 150,000 shells tailor-made for these cannons, and even a batch of Zuni rockets, all part of a deal believed to be worth just under $230 million. The hardware was set to transit through the Czech Republic, arriving in Ukraine raw and unmodified, ready for war. Now, you might think this sounds like Ukraine is receiving hand-me-downs. You would be dangerously mistaken. For Ukraine, this deal wasn't about getting something new, it was about getting something legendary. They acquired a weapon that has been a specter on the battlefield for any army unlucky enough to face it. The M110 howitzer isn't a clever surgical strike weapon. It's a brute force instrument of overwhelming power. It doesn't use a scalpel, it swings a sledgehammer. And in a war that has devolved into brutal World War I style artillery duels and grinding trench warfare, a sledgehammer is exactly what you need. This conflict in many ways is a time capsule of how battles were fought decades ago, and the M110 is the perfect tool for that kind of fight. And the pipeline might not be dry. The same reports indicate that the Greek armed forces operated around 145 of these M110A2 systems since the early 1980s. After sending 60 to Ukraine, they still have more. For decades, the M110 was Greece's premier long-range artillery solution, but as they modernized to the standard 155mm NATO systems, their surplus becomes Ukraine's salvation. This modernization created a golden opportunity for Kyiv to acquire an artillery piece capable of shattering fortified Russian defenses and vaporizing troop concentrations as they gather for an assault. The deal gets even sweeter when you dissect the ammunition package. This isn't just a pile of old shells, it's a versatile toolkit of destruction. Ukraine received 50,000 high-explosive M106 rounds, the workhorse shell designed not just to damage but to obliterate. They received 40,000 rocket-assisted M650 rounds, which are the M106 long arm, allowing it to reach out and touch targets that thought they were safe deep behind the lines. And then there are the real nightmares. 30,000 M509A1 dual-purpose cluster munitions, and 30,000 M404 improved conventional munitions. These aren't for hitting a single building. These are for saturating an entire grid square, turning a staging area for a Russian assault into a field of shredded metal and shattered morale. This means Ukraine's new howitzers are not just powerful, they are lethally versatile, capable of adapting to any target Russia presents. So, could Ukraine get more? The numbers suggest a definitive yes. With another 85 M110s potentially sitting in Greek storage, further deals could be on the horizon, allowing Greece to fund its own modernization by providing Ukraine with the perfect weapon to counter Russia's antiquated tactics. But the bigger question looms. What about the United States? The M110 is an American weapon, born and bred. An initiative called the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or PEARL, allows NATO nations to fund purchases of US equipment that is then sent directly to Ukraine. This is a game-changing concept. It means Ukraine isn't just getting what its allies think it needs, it's getting precisely what it asks for. PEARL could be the golden ticket to America's own stockpiles of the M110. But here the story gets murky. According to the defense outlet De Gaulle, the US produced a staggering 1,100 M110 howitzers after its introduction in 1963. The system is still technically active in allied nations like Turkey, Spain, and others. Spain in particular could be a candidate for a future transfer. But De Gaulle makes a contradictory claim about the US, that the M110 is both active and was retired in the 1990s, leaving the M109 Paladin as its sole self-propelled howitzer. So what happened to those 1,100 steel behemoths? We know part of the answer, and it only adds to the MA-110's legend. In a stunning display of battlefield ingenuity during the Gulf War, the US Air Force needed a bomb that could penetrate Saddam Hussein's deepest bunkers. They took the spent hardened steel barrels of MA-110 howitzers, packed them with explosives, and created the legendary GBU-28 Bunker Buster. The very steel designed to hurl shells was repurposed to become the projectile itself. But this doesn't answer the key question. Did the US scrap the entire chassis and gun systems, or are there hundreds of MA-110s sitting in the desert, barrelless but otherwise intact? If it's the latter, a path opens. Ukraine, with the help of its Czech partners, could potentially acquire these American chassis and manufacture new barrels, resurrecting an entire fleet of these monsters. It's speculative, but in this war, the speculative has a way of becoming reality. But let's move away from the maybes and focus on the terrifying reality on the ground right now. The arrival of the MA-110 in Ukraine is not just an upgrade, it's an evolutionary leap that will trigger key shifts on the front lines. These are not Cold War relics, they are instant game changers. So what does the MA-110 truly bring to the fight? In a word, violence. It delivers a scale of firepower that Ukraine has been desperately missing. Every single shell fired from an MA-110 carries 90 kilograms, nearly 200 pounds of high explosive. To put that in perspective, that is a payload of devastation that dwarfs standard 155mm artillery. With the rocket-assisted munitions we know Ukraine has, that 200-pound package of destruction can travel up to 30 kilometers, or nearly 19 miles, to find whatever Russia has foolishly left in the open. This raw power is fused with mobility. The MA-110 is mounted on a tracked chassis with a 405 horsepower engine. It can move, fire its earth-shattering payload, and then immediately move again, a shoot-and-scoot tactic that makes it a ghost to Russian counter-battery fire. Of course, this power comes at a cost. Each M110 requires a crew of 13 soldiers. 5 operate the vehicle itself, while the other 8 follow in a support carrier with the massive shells. This is a significant personnel commitment, which is why they're being deployed to specialized elite artillery brigades. But the trade-off is more than worth it. These crews command a gun that can elevate from -2 to +65 degrees and traverse 30 degrees left and right, covering a wide arc of the battlefield. The rate of fire is slow, typically 1 round every 2 minutes. But when you are firing 200-pound shells, you don't need speed, you need impact. The M110 isn't the rapid jab of a boxer, it's the knockout haymaker that ends the fight. And let's talk about the incredible economics of this weapon. For the roughly $230 million spent, the cost per shell comes down to under $1,300. Think about that. For the price of a high-end laptop, Ukraine can deliver a city block leveling punch. The howitzers themselves cost about $600,000 each. If a single M110 with a handful of its bargain price shells destroys just 1 or 2 modern Russian tanks, which can cost upwards of $4 million each, the system has already paid for itself many times over. In a war where Ukraine is fighting for its financial survival, this kind of return on investment is a strategic miracle. It allows Ukraine to inflict maximum financial, material, and psychological damage on Russia for a fraction of the cost of using more advanced, expensive missile systems. But the true genius of the MO-110's deployment lies in how it complements Ukraine's existing arsenal, creating a symphony of destruction. The 52nd Artillery Brigade is now a multi-layered nightmare for any Russian commander. They already have the domestically produced Bodna howitzer, a surgeon's scalpel for precise long-range strikes on high-value targets like command centers and ammunition depots far behind the lines. They also have the RM-70 Vampire, a multiple-launch rocket system that acts as a wide-area broom, sweeping away concentrations of troops and mechanized assaults with a torrent of fire. The MO-110 fits perfectly between these two. It's the specialist. It's the demolition crew. The Vampire deals with the assaulting infantry and light vehicles. The Bodna snipes the enemy's brain and supply lines. The MO-110 now has the job of cracking the toughest nuts, the fortified bunkers, the hardened command posts, the heavy armor that the Vampire's rockets can't reliably destroy. It frees up the Bodna to hunt even deeper, creating a layered defense that chews up Russian forces at every stage of their attack. The assaulting troops are shredded, the hardened targets behind them are pulverized, and the deep rear is disrupted. It's a comprehensive system of annihilation. Right now, this system is being put to the test in the crucible of eastern Ukraine. The 52nd Brigade is operating in the Kharkiv and Kramatorsk sectors. Kramatorsk is a linchpin city in the Donetsk fortress belt. For over a decade, Ukraine has turned it into a bastion, a hellscape for any invader. Now, with MO-110s on the field, any Russian attempt to mass forces for an assault on this fortress will be met with a rain of 200-pound shells they are utterly unprepared to handle. But the most terrifying application of the M1110 is yet to come. Think of Ukraine's infamous kill zones. These are not simple defensive lines. They are miles deep, meticulously engineered death traps. They are infested with drones, layered with anti-tank mines, dragon's teeth, and ditches designed to channel Russian armor into pre-sighted artillery funnels. Soldiers on foot face endless barbed wire and a labyrinth of tunnels from which Ukrainian defenders can launch devastating ambushes. The purpose of these kill zones is twofold: to bleed the enemy dry and to force them to move around the traps into open, exposed ground. This is where the M1110 becomes the executioner. As Russian columns are funneled into these open fields, they are already being hit by FPV drones and smaller artillery. Now imagine M1110s joining the party. Imagine shells weighing almost 200 pounds screaming down from the heavens, impacting with such force that they not only destroy their target but create a shockwave that cripples everything around it. Nothing Russia can send on the ground will survive that. No armor is thick enough, no trenches deep enough. What we are witnessing is the perfect marriage of an old weapon and a new war. Russia is fighting with antiquated tactics, using human waves and brute force assaults reminiscent of the Soviet era. And in a stroke of beautiful irony, Ukraine is now countering these tactics with a weapon forged in the Cold War, a Titan designed specifically to obliterate the massed armor and troop formations of the Soviet Union. The M110 is not just viable on this battlefield, it is utterly, devastatingly perfect for it. A Cold War giant has been reawakened, revitalized in Ukraine to fulfill the very purpose for which it was created. If Russia wants to fight a war using the strategies of the past, Ukraine now has the perfect weapon from that past to send them to their graves. And knowing Ukrainian ingenuity, they are already finding new ways to make this old dog even more lethal. A Titan has returned to the battlefield, and for Russia, the nightmare is only just beginning.